When you hear the phrase nuns and religion, you might first think of nuns, N-U-N-S. On this program, we're going to explore another kind of nuns, the N-O-N-E-S. All right, so I'm going to... Hi, I'm Ozzie Ostwalt, professor in Appalachian State's Department of Philosophy and Religion. This week, we're going to look at recent trends in American religion, including the rise of two populations known as seekers and nuns. Our guests are Dr. Randall Reed of our Department of Philosophy and Religion, Elizabeth Reese of the King Street Church, and the Reverend Vern Collins of Boone United Methodist Church. Welcome to you all.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Randy, if you will begin by just telling us who these folks are who we refer to as nuns.
Sure. So at the beginning of this decade, really, social scientists started noticing that on public surveys of people's religious identification, what they found was that people were, in increasing numbers, checking that very last box that says none of the above, right? And this became so notable. There'd always been nuns. I mean, people had always been checking this, but the increase in this number of people who were checking that last box became so notable that it became this sort of a phenomenon that the Pew Research Forum first reported on in their report called Nuns on the Rise. And so suddenly there was this interest of who are these people who are checking that last box? Who are the people who are suddenly saying, I'm not any of these religious identifications. I'm not a Baptist, I'm not a Methodist, I'm not a Presbyterian, or anything like that. I'm none of the above.
So if they're none of the above, do they identify with any religious tradition? I guess they identify with no religious tradition. They're completely unaffiliated. Does this mean they're atheist or agnostic? Or?
Well, it's interesting, Ozzie, because they're not atheists. Atheism has grown since the 2000s some. I mean, it has almost doubled during that period, but it's still very low. It's maybe, it's just gotten out of single digits. It's maybe at 10, 12% of the population. But this category of nuns seems to be people who still say that they believe in God. They still say they do some religious activities. Usually they say they pray. Some say they read their Bible and that sort of thing. But what they don't seem to do is that they are participants in religious organizations. They're no longer in the institutional church. And largely they're Christians. We've seen this most significantly in people who said when they were 16 they were going to church or were religiously identified, and now they say that they're not. And this is, I would say, most pronounced. This increase has happened across the population, but it's most pronounced in the millennial generation, those people who were born between 1980 and 2003. And those, while for the overall U.S. population, nuns constitute about a fifth, 20%. For the millennials, it's over a third of their generation identify as nuns.
So are they seeking a place in a religious group? Or because I've heard that phrase, seekers, as well. Or is that a different sociological category from the nuns? Do you differentiate between nuns and seekers?
Yeah, sociologically, we would make a distinction there. In fact, so Barry Cosman at Trinity College has done the American Religious Identification Survey, which is focused on millennials. And he finds that a better way of categorizing people is religious, secular, and spiritual. And nuns actually kind of overlap between the seculars and the spirituals. So when you try to kind of connect the two different kind of surveys, what you see is that people who identify as secular also identify as none. But a portion of people who identify as spiritual also identify as none. And what he found is that with the millennials, those three categories of religious, secular, and spiritual are about even. About a third of millennials say that they are religious, a third say that they are secular, and a third say they are spiritual.
So at least a good portion of this group we call the nuns are actually seeking something. They might be called spiritual but not religious.
That's right.
They're spiritual but they don't have a church home. Vern, I might get you to address this situation because you're one of our local ministers here. You don't look like the traditional minister, and I would point out that this is how you dress for your Sunday morning service, which you call Crossroads. This is a non-traditional service, and I guess that at least in part, the sorts of congregants you have, the sorts of folks who come to your services might fit this descriptive category, seekers or nuns. Would you just give us an idea of what Crossroads is like and how the service goes? And,
Sure.
Who goes to Crossroads?
Just a little background. When we began to kind of dream this up and ask the what if question, what if we had something on Sunday that looks different at Boone United Methodist Church than our 11 o'clock high church traditional and then our 8:45, which is a little more informal. The obvious answer to the question of who would we target were college students, but that felt incomplete. And so then we began to branch out from there and say, what if we created something that people who wouldn't normally feel comfortable walking in the door of a church would feel welcome. We have a beautiful sanctuary, stained glass, pipe organ. It's a beautiful space, but it looks very much like an institutional church. And Crossroads meets in our gym or our Family Life Center, and it's a blank slate every week until we set up chairs and make it look more like a worship gathering space. But our assumption is that to a degree everybody is seeking something. And we have our traditional, our 8:45 services are full. We have a lot of folks who call that their worshiping home, but we realize that we're just missing. We're missing an entire group of people, people who were not coming in the door for whatever reason, and so as we began to ask that question, we realized that it was the space, it was the flow, it was the format, it was the environment that was keeping folks away, and so we tried to counter that.
So there's something about then the traditional, institutional, formal church that doesn't resonate with a significant population of folks who might otherwise connect with the church. I think we have a short video clip, not of your service, but of what I would call a seeker service, a non-traditional contemporary service, and maybe we'll show this and have you comment a little bit on that, if you would, please. Okay.
Great.
This video clip, we have this non-traditional space, like your Family Life Center, could be a gymnasium. You have the congregates all standing, singing. You have a stage band with guitars and percussion. You have lighting. You have kind of all the elements of a rock and roll concert. If you don't listen to the lyrics, it sounds a little bit like that. What is it about this that you think might appeal to this population at a traditional service?
So if you've ever been to a rock concert, it is an experience like no other. It is hundreds or thousands of people in a room or in a space that are all focused and giving their energy to this thing that's happening on stage. They're engaged. They feel like they're a part of it when they're singing along with songs that they know. And we are simply trying to engage people and meet people where they are and give them an experience that's authentic. And I think that for us, that's key, is to give them an authentic experience on Sunday morning. And it's so much more than just what happens musically. For us, we found that there are other elements that help us achieve something that's authentic.
Well, I know in your particular service, I've been there a few times, and people are free to get up and get coffee or a donut while the music's going on, and
Right.
people are milling about, visiting. So it is very much a kind of laid-back type of setting. Let me ask you this. Are you ever concerned that by bringing in various elements of secular and popular culture, like the music, are you ever concerned that you're forfeiting somewhat what makes church distinctive from the rest of culture, or that you're becoming too much like popular culture?
That's a great question, and that's something that we've tried to be ultra sensitive to. We do believe that there are seekers in the room. All of us who gather for worship are seeking something. But we've tried to make sure that we keep the main thing, so to speak. We open the Word together, we pray together, we baptize, we gather around the Lord's table. The songs that we sing, while they may have a secular sound, are very much worship. And we don't make apology for that. We believe that that's an important part of what happens. It's in the way that we're trying to present it that we hope is engaging to folks. But it is something, I think, to be aware of. We don't ever want the band, the music they're leading, if it begins to feel like a performance, then we're moving in a wrong direction.
Right.
If the way that the word is being proclaimed is about the presentation, then we're moving in a wrong direction. So we try to keep focus on the gospel and the message that we're proclaiming.
Yeah. So you've got these different elements. The space is different, and that's where I wanted to bring Elizabeth in here for a moment, because talking about worship space, and we're all familiar with stained glass and organs and choirs and pews and whatnot, these kind of elements of high church. Elizabeth, you're active with the King Street Church, and I know King Street well. I've been up and down there. I don't see a King Street Church. I see the Baptist Church. I see a Church of Christ. But where exactly is King Street Church?
So King Street Church initially is at Boone Saloon.
At Boone Saloon.
Boone Saloon.
In a saloon.
Yes.
In a bar.
Yes.
Okay.
And we have a second one,
Yeah.
and that's at Appalachian Mountain Brewery.
At the brewery. Okay.
Yes.
So this is not where you would expect the church to meet, right?
Exactly.
In a bar or a brewery. So
Yes.
can you tell me a little bit about what goes on there? How is this different, and how it reaches out to perhaps the population that we're talking about? And I guess I would say that you identify yourself maybe as a seeker or a nun or spiritual but not religious. So this sort of setting appeals to you. But tell us a little bit about that service.
Okay, so I would say, first of all, as a nun, or what I would classify myself as a Jesus follower, not necessarily a Christian, but a Jesus follower, simply because of, I think, the negative connotations that people who aren't religious or Christians kind of seem to have. King Street Church is, I think, targeted to be in a casual space, and I mean, I'm a little more relaxed if I've had a beer. And so one of our main objectives is to promote honesty in talking about religious things, talking about God, or talking about other religious practices, other faiths. And so King Street, Boone Saloon was one of the places that we kind of settled on. We were talking about Murphy's and other places. And one of our guys had been banned from Murphy's, so we moved down the street to Boone Saloon.
Sounds like a fascinating group of people.
Indeed, very
it
colorful.
sounds like one thing that's characteristic of, say, this church, and I would think this population in general, is that one of the institutional things that perhaps is off-putting about the church is dogmatism or insistence on doctrine or certain
Precisely.
orthodoxy. You say you like to have discussions about theological topics, even about other religions. So
Yes.
is this one of the things that you would say characterizes a seeker or a nun, this kind of intellectual honesty when it comes to religion and a questioning spirit?
I would say so. I would say that a seeker might be more characterized as someone who maybe is a little more solid in a base foundational belief. I don't know, Randy, maybe you could correct me on that, but a nun is definitely someone who really wants to say, well, wait a minute, you know, I just went to the, you know, the Baha'i service and this, and, you know, well, you know, very often we maybe start with a scripture from the Holy Bible, but we end up putting it into the context of a Buddhist parable. I don't know that that's parable, but anyway. So yes, I would say that would be someone who would be a nun, would be really eager, I think, to discuss faith and religion and spirituality, but definitely not within the confines of a set one way that is expected that you should believe,
Right.
or that you do.
Now, if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about yourself. I know a lot of seekers and nuns say that they perhaps grew up in a tradition and became disaffected with it in some way. Others don't have any traditional religious background, and maybe you're coming at this from a different perspective. Is your background religious, and did you get disaffected with the traditional church in some way? Is that
Yes.
kind of your story?
My story would be, yes, I did come from an extremely traditional background, very strict Christian background, and I think I slowly moved toward not as toward, and I think it all stemmed out of questioning, like, things inconsistencies, I think, as far as strict principles and how that carried over into being kind or loving or forgiving or compassionate. And I don't know, that sort of led me to where I was. Beyond that was more looking at culture, and especially in Boone, even though we're tiny, all of these, you know, different people, whether they're professors from different places or they're artists or they're rock climbers, there's so much world out here. There's so much culture. There's really good music. There's lots of cool shows going on all of the time. And I think for me personally, what kind of pushed me over into, I don't really want to identify with what I was identifying with, it was there's so much out here that I cannot say God is not connected to, because it's really awesome.
So your own spirituality then transcends the church experience or the
Absolutely.
traditionally religious, and you find spiritual connection in these other areas of life. And I think
Absolutely.
that's a theme that we often hear from the seekers. And to be honest, you're not alone. You're in good company. Randy, maybe you can fill us in a little bit on the numbers. I read somewhere that there are like 1/3 of the millennial generation are nuns, and that's a huge number. Does that translate into raw numbers? Do you have that figure?
Well, there's 80 million millennials, and so about a third of them then means that there's, you know, what, 25 million, more or less, millennials who would fall into this category.
It's a significant
It's
number.
a significant number. And nuns really come in two categories, as you mentioned. There's kind of the kind that are second generation nuns. Their parents were nuns, so they're kind of nuns in the old-fashioned way. And then there are the people like Elizabeth who have dropped out. And that's about 70% of the nuns are people who have dropped out. About 30% of them are second generation nuns. So it's a phenomenon that's growing both from what we might call conversion or deconversion, as James Baylor calls it, and from people who are just a growing number of people who have never been religious and see no point in being religious. I mean, one of the things about the millennial generation is only about 40% of them say that religion is very or somewhat important in their lives. So that it's a decreasing number of people who actually see the point of religion, and I think what Vern said was really interesting, because this phrase authenticity. Right? This seems to be the thing that is, for those nuns who are still interested in looking for some kind of religious connection, authenticity seems to be that word that catches them. They're critical of the contemporary Christian church because they think precisely what Elizabeth said, that it's hypocritical, that it's judgmental, that it's intolerant, that it's homophobic. I mean, these are the critiques that surveys say that millennials and nuns have of the Christian church. And so moving it into pub churches, what we're talking about is really the emerging church movement, one that's really focused on dialogue and discourse and inclusion is where many nuns who are returning to some kind of religious connection are seeing some kind of value.
Something you said, I would think, Vern, irrelevance. The millennials see religion, they're not anti-religion as much as they find religion in the traditional sense irrelevant. And that has to cause concern, I would think, to ministers in traditional churches. And Vern, I'm sure this is where you hit the ground with your Crossroads service.
Right. So we tried to be intentional. So our traditional service meets at 11 o'clock, and we essentially meet in the 11 o'clock hour. We meet at 10:55. We said, well, we don't want to call it the 10:55 service. That doesn't do a lot of heavy lifting. And just in brainstorming and prayer, Crossroads seemed to be the place that we land. And essentially, Randy, to your point, what we're trying to say is that at any given moment, any of us are at a crossroads of life, and it could be a crossroads of faith, crossroads in relationship, in career, in questioning. I mean, and so to be able to gather and claim that and say, we're all on this journey together. For the first few years that we had Crossroads, I was so resistant to standing on the stage in the room because I didn't want to be seen as being above anyone else. I preached from the floor, but I'm height challenged, and so that became a problem. But it was just to try to be intentional to say, I'm on this journey with the rest of you. The band is on the journey with the rest of you. We're all in this together. And Sunday morning is important, but it's not meant to be the pinnacle. It's the stuff that happens at the brewery, and it's the stuff that happens at the saloon, and it's meant to be a part of the conversation, not the answer to the conversation. If we don't know the questions that are being asked, we can't answer those questions. And so even in the message, I endeavor each week not to tie it up with a bow, but to kind of leave it hanging with a question and say, what if this meant something for your life? What would your life look like if? And just to provide something for folks to think about as they look at their own lives.
And that kind of openness seems to be a kind of consistent theme here that might draw in nuns and seekers. And most of what, Vern, we've been talking about is nuns and seekers from the Christian perspective. But I heard Elizabeth say something about Baha'is and other traditions perhaps are represented in the saloon church. I don't know. I mean, do you have people, you're coming from a Christian background, but are there people there, is there, say, a Jewish nun or a Baha'i nun, or do folks from other traditions, and maybe Randy can speak to this as well, are they also considered seekers in this sense?
Well, we have an atheist, and always his discussion input is great. In fact, I guess we just don't. We don't really even think about what they are as much as, oh, cool, there's so and so. I'm so glad it's here. I can't wait to hear, what happened at such and such. I mean, there's so much just sort of interaction of normal life that I don't know. And okay, so your question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Well, I guess it's an unfair question in a sense because nuns want to get away from labels to start with. They don't want to, I'm assuming, don't want to be characterized as a Jewish nun or a Christian nun or even a nun. That's a phrase that sociologists have come up with and not one that seekers themselves would use.
I did have to text Vern and say, what's a nun?
Right. And it's a phrase that a lot of people are unfamiliar with unless you've been reading literature. Obviously, these trends, which have been going on for some time, Randy, accelerated most recently, are going to have some implications for the future of religion in America. Just if briefly you could say, in a sentence, what do you think the future holds for religion in America? Is this the beginning of the end, or is it a point of revolution, or are changes going to come about? Just briefly.
I mean, really, there's three sort of sociological guesses, right? One is that this is the sort of thing that every generation kind of goes through. I mean, the boomers dropped out of church for a while and then they came back. And the question is, is this going to be true for the millennials too? Are they going to just drop out of church for a short period of time and then they're going to come back when they start having kids? But they're getting married later, they're having children later, so they're having more time to actually set kind of habits of not going to church that the boomers did not. So it's possible that they won't return to church.
Well, I think regardless, we're going to see some transitions changing in the church, untraditional types of worship services. And this is something that bears watching. Maybe all of you can come back again and we can look into some of these trends in more detail. Everything you've had to offer has been fascinating, and I thank you for coming today. This is a great topic. Thanks to all of you. Next week, our topic will be religion and art, visualizing the religious experience. I'm Ozzie Ostwalt. Till next time.